Move on, number 3, review results of survey for park and recreation facility planning. Read.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I provided in the packet for you kind of the high-level results of the survey that we had, along with all the comments for it. And as promised in the RCA packet, or the RCA, I said I would take a little deeper dive into some of the user groups that used or that filled out the survey and see how maybe specific user groups responses may differ from what the cumulative answer is. So I'll run through those, but I think just to be in brief at the start here, what we see in the high-level answer of the whole group is very similar to what we see when we break it down by user group. I think across the board, there are a couple of deviations from that, but in a lot of cases, it is very similar, and I think this paints a really good picture of the respondents we have, the 443 respondents, of kind of where the priority levels may lie within our facility planning. So with that, I hope that this can be a good document for us to use. I'll just kind of run through some of the statistics I found and maybe some of my feelings towards them, and then open it up for if anybody has any questions or thought towards our next step. So in total, 443 respondents, as I mentioned, 387 of those were from East Grand Forks. I broke it down kind of by demographic of user group as well. Our ice sports group, that would be the hockey, the figure skating, the recreational skaters, that made up 269 respondents. I separated it as well by field sports, soccer, lacrosse, baseball, softball, flag football. That had 222 responses. I think it's important to note, though, as people were responding, they were able to select multiple demographics within the sports they play. So, for example, if a household has a hockey player and a softball player in it, they would have been able to check both boxes. So their answers may be duplicated in some cases with these numbers. Indoor sports and other. This one was kind of tough to figure out how to separate it, so we just kind of bulked them all together. Indoor turf sports, wrestling, and then spectators, coaches, and referees. There were 262 that fell within that demographic. And then the final one I wanted to separate to see just how their feelings may differ was the business sponsors and vendors. There were 52 businesses that responded within that group. So the first questions we had, just kind of the overlying response towards the sales tax, we found that 53% of the total response said yes, they would support a 1% sales tax should that ever come up. And a much higher percentage than our first survey in March answered maybe to the question. 25% this time said maybe they would support it. That was a lot higher than our previous survey we ran in March. And I think that when you read the comments too, you're going to see that that's a consistent response from a lot of people, is the wait and see approach. We did in the intro to this survey include that we knew the sales tax for 2020 was down the road, that was not an option for us, and that in light of everything that's had been going on and has been going on with COVID, that was explained. If people read the intro to the survey, that was explained. So I think you see it, the wait and see approach to me is kind of twofold. It's one, let's wait and see what happens with COVID and with our local economy. But the other part of it, I think you see in the comment, is a lot of a wait and see approach to what does the project look like, and understanding that we're surveying a large group of people, and this is a very broad-based survey with a lot of different projects potentially included. So I think a lot of people maybe, and I would agree 100% with that, is that let's wait and see what maybe our final plan looks like and what our project looks like before we start saying yes or no to any type of what the financial impact of that could be. So I wasn't surprised by that answer by any means. Asking people how often they use our facilities, we found right now that almost 67% of the respondents said they use the facility at least one time a month. One time a month, multiple times a week, one time a week, but 67% in total said they used it at least one time a month. Of those, 35% said they felt they would use facilities more often if they had improvements done to them. And another 32% said maybe they would use the facilities more often. So again, that 32% being a high number in the maybes, I feel like, again, is kind of wanting to see what do the projects look like, what kind of improvements are we talking about, to see whether or not it could be something that they would be able to answer yes to that question on. Skipping from that, then we talked a little more specifically about ice arenas and the availability of ice year-round or as part of the year. And really the basis of wanting to have this question in the survey is kind of going back to the original feasibility study we had and the idea of connecting two rinks together at the north site at the Civic Center. And one of the things that we had included in that feasibility study was dehumidification and an industrial-sized refrigeration plant to get an idea of whether or not the ability to have ice year-round or in the warmer ambient temperatures was something that we should consider in our planning and that was important to our residents. And I think just some of the answers maybe spells out that a little bit for us. 42% of people said yes, they would like to see ice available year-round. And then even higher than that, 52% said that they'd like it for it to be available earlier in the year. And in the question, I used the month of August as a starting date for that. So that one may be one, as we get into planning, we're going to want to, I would think, maybe look closer at in how that impacts what we do within the budget, within the arenas. But I think that in today's world, that would be an important one, is the ability to at least look closely at how we want to use our ice and at what months of the year we want to use it for. And then finally, before we get into the building specifics, the 68% of people answered that they would like to see East Grand Forks host more sports tournaments. And that would be one that, again, would fit within the line of some of the projects we've discussed with the initial feasibility study, is wanting to make sure that our facilities were at a top notch, that people would want to come to East Grand Forks for the amenities we have and for the tournaments we can put on. So with that, just then the questions from there really went into kind of a facility by facility basis and asked questions. The ball fields being the first one, I'll go through that one. We asked probably more questions than the others because we hadn't done as much homework on it previously in the feasibility study that was first put out. As we recall, that was really based on ice arenas and multi-purpose facility, and we didn't discuss ball fields at all. So we asked a couple extra questions on that to get a feel from people on what they'd like to see. The top rated one across all demographics was that improved drainage on the current grass fields was the most important thing, and that renovated restrooms and concessions areas was second on all of those lists. And I really think the ball fields is it's going to show kind of an underlying message from all the respondents in that it seems like the fixing our current facilities and improving upon our current facilities is the consensus answer that most people are going to want to see in how we go. And our current economic situation with COVID all probably plays some part in that, but I also think it just really paints a picture of the request of our community. We hear it from people when we talk to them too about taking a responsible approach to fixing what we have and making the best out of we can of what we have across all these facilities. So that's one that to me was really placed high, was just on being able to improve our current grass fields as one that I think is an attainable goal for us to work towards. Of the list that I provided in the packet, the only one that is higher for the baseball softball user group than it is for the cumulative is the covered grandstand for spectator seating. That was 6th overall of the whole community, and it moved up to 5th if I just sorted it by baseball and softball users. So that's one that maybe could be a little higher there. The one thing I will add, if we want to look at that further, is I wasn't able to sort it by just spectators alone. I didn't have that sort done, and JLG Architects, who helped us with this, they have the control to do it all, and I didn't ask for that request early enough to be able to get it as part of my stats for tonight. Moving through the baseball field then into the ice arenas, when I sort it by sport users, ice sport users within the ice arenas, the one thing that we see there is that from the total list, the locker rooms and the off-ice training or fitness spaces really rise higher into the list. At the Civic Center, building accessibility, handrails, access to ice level is number one across everybody's list. Second place moves up to more or bigger locker rooms for the ice sport user groups. And third for those groups moves into space for off-ice training. The other nice thing or important thing to add is when we sorted just by our business community, our sponsors and our vendors, the last place for the whole community is community rooms for group meetings. For the business community that answered, that's second. That's the second most important for that demographic. So I thought an interesting rise in that. Again, just to point out, we see that in fifth place across all demographics, or fifth or last place, was having the two ice rinks connected into the same facility. So, again, the VFW arena is largely the same. That in repairing the roof leaks, the peeling paint, the drainage issues is the most important for everybody. All demographics agreed that the parking lot improvements and better access to both arenas from the parking lot was important. The Blueline Arena was the same as well, with hoping for warmer space for viewing, for more comfortable viewing. It's a cold building, and that's the one thing we hear a lot is people asking both from in town and from out of town to want to see some improvements there. And then again, the sight lines and the building aesthetics, kind of the interior things to make it feel a little more friendly, was important to people. Touching on skipping to the multi-purpose facility, the highest rated for all demographics was having year-round access to a space for jogging and walking in a temperature-controlled facility. And I want to point out in that when I asked the question, I wanted to be very direct in saying a temperature-controlled facility, because I think that's maybe one of the underutilized portions of our current facilities. It's been growing in use, but I think it's still underutilized. Is the VFW arena with the new boiler system we had in there, we kept that at 52 degrees all year round this winter, which is in the winter months when you go inside, that's very comfortable for walking or jogging laps. And I think with maybe a little more work put into that within our current facilities and more advertising towards that, potentially some way to allow access to the building more than just the hours of 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. when we're open for ice activities, that could be something we could meet the need of people without having to have a whole building dedicated to fitness training and so forth. So it's something that the temperature controlled part of that was one I wanted to make sure was included. And then when we look at the field sports, the other sports, access to indoor turf fit as third place for both of those. The spring, summer seasonal access and the year-round access were almost identical in the scoring they got from somewhat important, very important, or extremely important. They were almost identical between third and fourth place. But the field sports did rank spring summer access as third out of the two options. I think the only other thing that I want to add, just in high-level comments before I open it to any questions on this, is that going back to the Civic Center again, if you look at this, you probably look at it and see that we didn't ask a question about ice plant at all in that question, whereas we did in the VFW arena. And we left that out for the largest reason is that we didn't want to include so many questions in the survey that it got to be something that people didn't want to complete. They were still able to complete the survey in 3 to 5 minutes, which was important to us, and having people be able to get into it and take it seriously and give it their attention. And we know that those ice plants need to be replaced. That's the root of the entire project and kind of why we're having the discussion in the first place. So I left the question out for the survey as a point of, I felt it was safe to say that the ice rink as they stand can't continue if we don't put that work into it. So I felt we didn't need to ask the question when it comes to the Civic Center. The VFW arena, I did ask the question in terms of, do we replace the ice plant in an effort to have it remain an ice rink? Because the first feasibility study, remember, talked about not having it be an ice rink anymore. And that ranking came in third in the list behind the repairing the current building issues and the parking lot expansion. But again, the scoring, if you look at it, is just decimal points behind the first two. So again, I think when you look at the projects as a whole and what we're going to have for a budget, we may see that rise to the top. Is that keeping the VFW as an ice rink might be something we need to consider versus building a new building and so forth. So finally, I think I'll just open it up if anybody has any questions. If anybody has